Good evening and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Woodbury County Zoning Commission. Today's date is May 28th, 2025, and the time is 5 o'clock. Tonight's meeting will be audio taped and minutes will be prepared. In respect to all parties, we ask those present to turn off cell phones or set to vibrate. Those in attendance are asked to legibly complete the attendance sheet upon the front table. I would like to take a moment to review the procedures that the commission will follow tonight. First, the commission will handle the normal housekeeping agenda items, and for each additional application on the agenda, I will open the public hearing on the item. The planning and zoning staff will then present the staff report, including the staff recommendation. Any letters or other communication received from the public prior to the hearing will be entered into the record. The applicant will then have the opportunity to present his or her case or respond to the staff report. Next, we will hear comments from the public. If you would like to speak either in support of or against the application, you must come to the microphone. Please first state your name and address for the record. All interested parties shall be heard, but repetitious comments should be avoided. Repetitious or irrelevant comments may be rolled out of order by the chair. I ask that you remain respectful and courteous with your comments at all times. We will limit those comments to 3 minutes. After all public comments have been heard, the staff and applicant may make a closing statement. The hearing shall then be closed by motion and vote. Thereafter, no further comments from the staff, public, or applicant may be heard unless asked for by the commission. The commission shall then deliberate the case and may ask questions of the applicant, the staff, or any party offering testimony. However, such questions do not reopen the hearing for additional comments from the public unless so requested or approved by the commission. The commission will then formulate and vote on a motion. The motion will typically either grant or deny the requested application. Any commission member who has an ex parte communication to place in the record of this meeting should do so prior to the beginning of the deliberation of the respective agenda item. That being said, roll call is the first thing on our agenda. Let the record reflect we have everyone here but Jeff. Okay. So the next item we have on our agenda is a public comment on matters not on the agenda, which is an informational item. Do we have anybody here that has anything they want to say about anything that's not on the agenda? Okay, that was item number 3. The next thing is item number 4, which is approval of the minutes from previous meeting from March 24th, 2025.
I'll approve.
We have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, minutes have been approved. The next item on the agenda is items of business. First one is a public hearing, proposed Washburn addition minor subdivision on parcel number 894-635-2000009. Michael W. Washburn and Janine J. Washburn. Dan, do you want to read the information into the record for us, please?
Yes, as the chair mentioned, this is a 3-lot minor subdivision on the property identified as parcel 8946352000009. The purpose of the subdivision is to divide the 8.088 acres or more or less into the respective lots. Lot 1, 3.56 acres, lot 2, 2.5 acres, lot 3, 2.03 acres. This has been properly noticed and the stakeholders have been all to comment. The county engineer did find the proposal within compliance with Iowa code measures as far as closure. The county engineer did lay out some details as far as access for the lots following her criteria. The property owner should follow those respective items, which she can oversee with the property owner subsequent to the split. The property is located in the agricultural estates district already, which does facilitate for potential future housing. The city of Lawton did approve this respective final plat, and everything pretty much appeared in order. And of course, this is our first subdivision with our new county engineer, Laura Sievers, as well. So everything checked out from that. And so it's the staff's recommendation that this can be recommended for approval to the Board of Supervisors.
Questions or comments, or are we ready to make a motion for the hearing?
I have a motion to approve it. I'll make a motion.
The public hearing
Oh.
is open.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's open the public hearing.
Okay.
Okay, we got a motion to open the public hearing. Can I get a second?
And, it is open right now, so.
Oh, thank
if
you.
you were to
We
close
just.
it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Confusion here. Okay, we need to close it. What?
You do have representatives in the room too.
Oh. Do we have someone here that wants to speak to
Allison.
this? Alan?
My name's Alan Fagan from Sioux City. I'm the surveyor for this subdivision. And Dan covered what we're trying to accomplish here, but I'm here to answer any questions if you have any.
I guess one question, septic's all contained on lot 2.
It's all on lot 2. Lot 3 is to be sold to the property owner to the west. I don't think he plans on building on that lot. And lot 1 to be sold if they have a buyer for it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. We ready to close the public hearing?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
A motion, can I get a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay. Public hearing is closed. Are you ready to make a motion for the application?
Yeah, I'll move to move it forward. I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay. We have approved,
Yes, you've approved the recommendation to the Board of Supervisors.
yes.
Yep.
That was kind of vague, wasn't it? But we got it.
Yep.
We know each other. Okay, good. All right. That means we're on to the next item on the agenda, which is another public hearing action item, proposed zoning ordinance map amendment for rezone for agricultural preservation, AP to general industrial zoning district, parcel number 864-629-351012, New Cooperative Inc. Can you give us the information on this one, Dan?
Yes, with this public hearing, New Cooperative, who has a representative here tonight, has submitted an application for a zoning ordinance map amendment rezone of parcel 86462935110 from agricultural preservation to the general industrial zoning district. This is right down there on the edge of the city of Sloan, the part right at the city limits. The company already owns the abutting parcel to the east, which is presently zoned general industrial. They operate a grain receiving and loading facility. If the zoning is approved, New Cooperative plans to build a temporary grain storage facility on the parcel with a capacity of 1.7 million bushels of corn. The proposed use aligns with the county's land use guidelines, which allow for grain terminals, elevators in the general industrial zones. The company believes the rezoning is consistent with the county's future land use plans, which indicate a transition to industrial use in the area. New Cooperative is seeking approval to expand its operations and support the local economy. This proposal's been noticed in Sioux City Journal's legal section. May 13th, 2025, the neighbors have been duly notified via a letter. May 12th, 2025, about tonight's zoning commission public hearing and have been requested to comment. As of the printing of this packet, we have not received direct comments. Appropriate stakeholders, including government agencies, utilities, and organizations have been notified and requested to comment, which any would be in the packet. We haven't received direct objections from the stakeholders. Based on the information received and the requirements set forth in the zoning and subdivision ordinance, the proposal meets appropriate criteria. It's recommendation staff to approve pending on any further public testimony.
Okay, do we have anyone here from New Cooperative?
Good afternoon. My name is Frank Huseman. I represent New Cooperative and just wanted to
reiterate, this parcel is just outside the city limits of Sloan. Right across the dredge ditch is the city limits, which we have industrial property there. This would be an addition to that, just able to extend our storage facilities. Up here to answer any questions anyone may have. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
The only question, this is just a bulk storage for corn, you said, my understanding.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's not not an upright silo, not a bin. It's a temporary facility. Yes.
Do we have anyone else in the public that wants to speak to this application? Okay, no, any other commissioners, comments or questions? Okay, I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close.
Got a second?
I'll second.
Okay, got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, public hearing is closed. We're ready for a motion to either approve or deny.
I make a motion to recommend approval of zoning ordinance map amendment to the, from AP to GI on this parcel to the Woodbury County Board of Supervisors.
Okay, I have a motion. Can I get a Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Which leads us to the next item on the agenda. Public hearing, action item, consideration of borrow pit for earthen materials in the AE zone district zoning ordinance text amendment for a recommendation to the Woodbury County Board of Supervisors. Dan, do you want to read the information into the record for this one?
Yes. Okay, on this some background, this will be page 53 of the packet. On April 29th, the Woodbury County Board of Supervisors initiated the consideration of amendment to the Woodbury County zoning ordinance, specifically to revise the land use summary table of allowed uses to classify borrow pits for earthen materials as a conditional use within the agricultural estates zoning district. That's just the general summary, so I'm going to explain some more basically off of the packet. Section 3.034 of the ordinance prohibits borrow pits in the agricultural estate zoning district, limiting property owners' ability to excavate earth materials for construction, improve land usability, or enhance road safety through strategic grading. This information comes pretty much verbatim from the Board of Supervisors agenda item. It says they propose amending the ordinance to allow the conditional use permit applications to be considered for borrow pits in AE zones per section 2.029, which is the conditional use process, enabling case-by-case reviews by the Zoning Commission and Board of Adjustment. This change ensures community output and evaluates impacts on environment, traffic, and neighborhood compatibility, aligning with county goals. The amendment promotes equity as borrow pits are permitted in adjacent, at times, agricultural preservation zones and supports agricultural safety and infrastructure objectives while maintaining oversight. Under section 2.023, of the Woodbury County zoning ordinance, the Board of Supervisors has the authority to initiate amendments to the text. This directive tasks the Zoning Commission to conduct tonight's public hearing to perform their function of reviewing the amendment and any supporting information prior to considering and providing their recommendation to either approve or disapprove the proposed amendment. The draft language was included with the Board of Supervisors backup material. And just for some general background, if I can move some pages to the packet here. Okay, that's just the agenda item. But in general, the language for the Board Commission to consider is page 61. It's basically asking for a conditional use permit opportunity in the agricultural estates areas in particular. Now, the concerns that kind of arose from the supervisors entailed that there's significant amount of land and parcels out there in the county, and maybe particular areas of land that need to be adjusted or changed in a form of development other than, for example, like a building permit to put a house in or go to a farther level of development. There's not a provision in the ordinance that gets us to a large scale of removing dirt or earth and material to convert the land into another way to make the land more usable for a respective property owner. Now, one of the things that they looked at was we've kind of got a couple scenarios that are kind of confronting each other, and that is looking back at 2008 when this ordinance was put together, and I would have to defer to some of the members that do have the experience of being around some of those testimonies, and I would ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the consideration is that AE is considered an area where there's more density, where there's housing involved, and when you have more dwellings and more housing, even though it retains much of the agricultural aspects and usability, the concerns may have been in 2008 that maybe you don't want borrow pits right next door to housing. As you know, through the conditional use permit process, when you look at areas and parcels on a case-by-case basis, a lot of the engagement of the public is, how is our neighborhood affected by that? And maybe some of the consideration in 2008 was you have more people kind of clustered in an area with the expectation of being a neighbor, where there's not going to be necessarily major excavation projects right on a lot or two that are in the neighborhood. The issue is at hand with the zoning ordinance. The definition of borrow is so broad without any intermediary or any caps or any provisions that create a middle ground as far as somebody developing or trying to get the land to a certain way, it runs into a borrow pit. So ideally, what is supposed to happen when a person wants to change the aspect of their land, they would ultimately come to the zoning commission and ask for permission, but we run into, wait a minute, we want to change this aspect of our land or grade it, but it's prohibited here. But hey, I want to change my land in some respect, whether it's the grades, the topography, the water runoff and everything. So we do have provisions as far as grading permits. Typically grading permits get up to the acre threshold where the DNR gets involved, where you have to have MPDES number 2, which is basically stormwater runoff and plans that you're not going to have adverse effect on the neighbors. So if we kind of start doing a brainstorm session and talk about what could go wrong with grading and what could go wrong with neighbors, and you get into, well, rains and runoff and issues where you have density in the neighborhood, so you can kind of see what the mindset may have been in 2008 in terms of having the borrows out there. On the other hand, the way the county is designed, we might have an entire agricultural area out there that is entirely surrounded by AP, and across the street you have AP, but then this particular parcel could be AE, for example, and there may not be so much density around there. I think what the supervisors are saying or requesting for this to be analyzed is, hey, wait a minute, if it's a conditional use, why can't at least have the C in there where you can evaluate whether that location is acceptable or not? And I know that there's much experience at the commission at different times based on different projects where you might have a neighborhood where the room is full with people that disagree on a borrow pit in a respective neighborhood. But the issue could potentially be you have a parcel that's out in the county somewhere that just happens to be AE for whatever reason that is empty, but they're not eligible for that borrow scenario. We've examined various other aspects in terms of when what constitutes a borrow, or whether the county is working on a road or redoing the road, as far as the engineering aspects, which would fall into a different category. As far as the zoning ordinance basically kicks in at the right-of-way line. And when you're on an individual's property and taking up X amount of feet. And so to me, that's what triggers the ordinance regulation, where somebody would have to come to the zoning commission and to the Board of Adjustment as far as consideration within that AP, that AE aspect. But without a good way of looking at development outside of building a house, in terms of having a level of being able to prepare land or adjusting land to a certain way, we don't have a threshold or a definition that gets us to a way to accommodate on flattening ground or removing dirt and having that dirt transferred. The other issue at hand here is the agricultural exemption. The question is, why do some people get to do it, other people do not get to do it? We run into that with farming a lot, where a farmer may control X amount of acres and they may go to a parcel that they control. That can fall under the agricultural exemption where they're transferring dirt from one farm parcel to another farm parcel, all within the grounds of the agricultural exemption. Again, that's a non-economic use as far as the farmer taking a piece of land and being outside of the realm of the agricultural exemption, where they want to develop that piece of land, because it could be twofold. You want to improve a piece of land, but you also want to sell that fill or sell that dirt to somebody for a profit. And so that can create that economic context that really puts us back front and center in what that borrow pit aspect is. And so there have been a few incidents as far as borrow activity that we've looked at where folks should have permits. They have not had permits, and we've had to kind of work backward in retrospect in terms of finding solutions as far as getting folks into an appropriate level of permitting. And we know logistically moving dirt back to a location that has already been removed is a nightmare as far as the level of permitting. And so we do see an area that there's an issue where the supervisors had pointed out that the AE parcel, because it does have so much agricultural aspects to it, it's kind of the happy medium. It's still agriculture. You can farm it. You can have your crops there. The distinguishing factor between AP and AE, in my opinion, are two things: more housing and borrow pit or no borrow pit are kind of the major things between the two. So I understand the logic in 2008 where a neighbor would want to possibly have the assurance that the neighbor next door on the 2-acre parcel in a county subdivision that is planned for county living, that their neighbor's not going to go into an extent of a borrow activity or borrow business when they expect to have peaceful living out there in the county. So that's kind of the trade-off, because again, we can have that parcel out there that's, we could have a 40-acre parcel out there that's sitting in AE, but that's preventing that person from doing the economic side of it. But on the flip side, go back to what I said before about the agricultural exemption, because a farmer yet could invoke that. So we're dealing with the percentage of folks that fall within the, I want to take the dirt off the land and I want to sell it off to somebody else, again, for improvement aspects. I know what the supervisor sent forward to you in the background material. They highlighted that there may be situations that there's significant hills that create scenarios where the county would probably love to see dirt taken off of areas that even go further into the property owner's land. And so that, in a sense, becomes a temporary issue. So the key is, if you have a conditional use permit, somebody brings you a robust project forward on an AE and they tell you this is temporary, I'm coming in to take the dirt out during the month of July. It will be out in July and I'm leaving, and the zoning commission and the Board of Adjustment sort of lock it down in terms of the conditional use permit process. I think that's what the supervisors are looking for, and they want to see what comes out of this as far as the public proceedings and what folks have to say about it, as well as what you report back ultimately to the Board of Supervisors. Now, this is solely your recommendation. They've triggered the process for this, so you can bring a recommendation back to them in some sort, but they definitely can be moving forward as far as what recommendation that they take from you as well, because they would have to have up to 3 public hearings and engage the public at that supervisor level as well. So this, for the good of the public, this is just kind of the first as far as being at the zoning commission level, discussing it and finding out what we have here, asking the commission to do their due diligence on looking at this information and reporting back to the supervisors based on what we can glean. So that's the narrative there.
So the first thing I want to ask, is there anyone here then that wants to speak to this application? It's not an application. Do we have anyone here that wants to speak to the borrow pit item on our agenda?
My property is one that brought this up to their attention.
Can we get your name and address, please?
Steven Sitzman.
Okay.
Uh,
You know,
You can proceed.
okay.
okay.
I live just east of Leeds. I had just under 5 acres of property. I've got a large house. All the kids are gone. There's just 2 of us now. I'd like to build a small one next to it. So I talked to my neighbor. I bought a small parcel of property from him to attach to mine, so I can split my property if I want. The small parcel is a hill between us. It all comes down to my property as it is now. So I went ahead and I know contractors in town here that haul dirt. In Sioux City here, they're running out of places. They've taken almost all the hills down in Sioux City for dirt for filling in town. They're running out of places. They're getting where they either got to go to Plymouth County because Plymouth will let them take hills down for borrow, for fill. They're running out of places. They need places close by to get dirt. All right, I know some of them. I wanted that hill moved back. It's graded just like it was when I moved it back. It came to county's attention. I had no idea. So it's almost all graded out. Cost me nothing because they can use the dirt. Now they're saying, well, I wasn't supposed to do that. Well, it's a little too late because I didn't know it. They said the county says you have to take a permit out for it. I said, fine, I'll take a permit out. You don't have a permit for it, is what I was told. So it's kind of an oxymoron, but mine's pretty much all taken out. Change the grading, not at all. The hills just slope back, move back. I got enough property now, I can build another house if I want. And then split it, sell mine off. But this is what they're running into, contractors in town. They're begging for dirt now because the city has no hills hardly left in town. The city lets they can develop out. If you want development out in the county on the edge of town, that's your opportunity. Let them take the dirt from a farmer or whoever, level it off, and you're gonna have developments out there. It's gonna move it out. I mean, that's all I gotta say, but this is the reason for borrowing, is they absolutely run out of town. You know around town, you've seen how they've taken dirt down all the way along the outer belt. They're running out of that. And that's about the last place they got. So they need to start moving out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have anyone else? We have no one on the phone.
No.
Okay, this is public hearing, so we want to hear from you about the situation out there. You're our eyes and ears.
I guess I was just thinking about maybe a simple solution for this. If it's a road project or if it helps the road, why can't the county purchase right away, remove the dirt, and then afterwards sell excess right away? Maybe a quick solution instead of going through a big zoning change.
Yeah, right away, again, that's a good point, could be potentially looked at. It is the private property scenario there where it triggers board review for the conditional aspect. And so I think what came about with the supervisors was much more that a conditional use is designed. A conditional use does not mean that it's allowed out there. It means you got to face the board. You have to face the zoning commission. You have to look at the uniqueness of the project at hand. And so the problem that we have with the ordinance is the definition of borrow covers, it could actually cover to the point that you fill up a wheelbarrow and you move it across your yard. It's just so broad that way. So we don't have a reasonable trigger point as far as what is reasonable on the agricultural estates land. So somebody could technically, let's say you're up in the Los Hills and you have a lot of neighbors come out and you have runoff issues. And we have all these different criteria that we have to look at in terms of promoting public health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood. And so the commission and the Board of Adjustment have the full right to have an application come in and say, this does not meet the criteria, therefore no borrow pit there at that location. They have that prerogative. What the supervisors have said is that they think that each location, based on their 5-0 direction, is to if somebody desires to go to the point of a level of development that is for just fixing the property for a future aspect like the hill or that's on the private property, that they think it should be scrutinized the same way as the other and versus telling them no up front. Instead of saying this is absolutely prohibited. That's the way it looks like now.
I just feel that
Yeah.
the suggestion that I made eliminates the idea that it's a borrow pit. A borrow pit is typically, it shows up on your road plans that they have permission to go onto that property, take that dirt. It doesn't change the right of way. But if they purchase the right of way, then they can do with it what they want. The county, in other words, in my opinion. But it's just an idea.
Yeah, that's a relevant, good idea in terms of information.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Commissioners, comments, questions?
My one comment, when Dan spoke, there's no true definition of the borrow of size. And you made a comment about major excavation. What makes the difference between major excavation, minor excavation? So my belief is the C is the best answer, that it's scrutinized, every project is scrutinized and can be given a conditional use or not.
And I think one thing back in 08, if it was looked at where it was AP only, like you said, it was in a housing development, you don't want a bunch of dirt work. You don't want a borrow pit like the DOT had that runs for 3 years or 2 years or whatever it may be. So that was a reason to not have it in AE or ag residential at that time. But the other end of the spectrum is by allowing it through a conditional use permit in ag estates, you can develop land that maybe wouldn't be developable in an area that you should build homes on instead of keep farming it or whatever else is being done. I think the biggest thing is the scrutiny that it would receive through a conditional use permit is going to apply on a case-by-case basis and address issues of surrounding landowners that, no, we don't want this because of this, or we don't want this done, but we'll accept a borrow pit on certain situations for, this purpose. So I guess, and then the issue on the road, I've seen road projects that have extended out beyond the right of way, and they've done dirt work with that dirt and moved it elsewhere in the county, and the landowners didn't give up the right to that property. So it's happened on road projects currently. So it's something that gets done. Maybe it's overlooked, maybe it's not noticed, but maybe by having the conditional use permit there, you can allow for it to be done in the correct way.
And kind of to go to what the supervisors are looking at, because I know they're aware of the process, but for example, when we do have a conditional use requirement, we have the certified abstractor listing where the neighbors will be notified about the idea that their neighbor is proposing this. They have the ability to approach the commission and the Board of Adjustment and point out the respective concerns. And I will mention that in the last couple of years along the Highway 20 corridor, we've had those couple projects come here where most of the time a borrow pit is technically temporary. We have that, we have the language in the ordinance that says it's borrow pit, but we don't have a provision that is a temporary, but we've relied on the Board of Adjustment to put in their resolution a time frame. So the applicant, the expectation, I think, of the county, and I don't want to speak for the boards, but when I look at it from the staff lens, what we need to know is we need to know exactly how they intend to use their land out there. We need them to approach the county, go through a permitting process so the neighbors will know, so that the neighbors know that why are these trucks appearing? Why are these trucks coming in? Is there going to be a level of dust? Is there going to be a way to mitigate? And there's been times where people have asked the Board of Adjustment directly when we get to that public hearing, what are you going to do about dust on my road? And then the Board of Adjustment can come in and actually put a condition on there and say that, okay, you've got to put something down during the course of this project. The Board of Adjustment, I remember the one of the aspects that came out on that, it wasn't so much a borrow pit, but you remember at the end of Buchanan when they had the concrete out there along Highway 20, somebody mentioned at the Board of Adjustment meeting, well, there's a church there across the road. Can you make contact with that church and understand when their hours of activity are happening so that you can be mindful? So this automatically triggers that conversation where the stakeholders and being concerned about everybody is there. So we would need to know haul routes. We would need to see grading plans, like always. We need to see that they go through the DNR permitting, which is an MPDES number 2, and having a stormwater pollution prevention plan so that we know that runoff isn't going to happen directly on the neighbors, that there's going to be things that are dealt with to mitigate that, because the neighbor sure needs to know and it needs to appreciate when their neighbor are digging to that extent. So the conditional use permit is our one opportunity to force the neighbors to know. In other words, to make sure a letter gets sent over to that. It doesn't work when we administratively approve a permit because we approve permits, but getting people in front of the board, getting them in front of the commission ensures that we can run it through the criteria and to see whether that location is or is not appropriate. And I think at times when people see the C, they think, oh, it's a slam dunk. It's going to work fine at that location. But I think we need to always reserve the right that a conditional use permit is a maybe permit. We don't know whether or not it fits with the area. But I do think based on what the supervisors had put in the packet, as far as what they directed us, is reasonable in terms of, okay, we got this concern, this concern, this concern. But I also think on the other side of the sword, it was reasonable back in 2008 to think, we got to be careful with the intensity here, because you could have a platted neighborhood where somebody don't like their hill and all of a sudden the trucks are running and we got a problem there. But the way we can try to prevent that from happening is force a conditional use permit where the neighbors can come to the meeting and decide whether or not that scope of the project could fit with the neighborhood or not. And what I again mean by that is the goal is that we look at it from a temporary aspect. Hopefully the developers, when they run out of dirt, they're done too. So we need to know how much cubic yards or whatever are being extracted at a point. When is this done? And so I think that's a duty of the Board of Adjustment, is to have that off switch. In other words, this permit expires on December 31st, 2026. And if it doesn't expire, you got to go back to the Zoning Commission and the Board of Adjustment and to get a renewal. And that's kind of the way it is. If everything is done right in terms of scrutinizing the scope of the project. So I know we've talked in the past about the flexibility. Well, that flexibility is the board's grabbing the reins and looking at what could go wrong here and trying to have something in stone there, because the resolution that is signed by the chair of the Board of Adjustment is pretty much the equivalent of an ordinance that has to be enforced and it has to be followed. And that's the expectation granted to the applicant if they so desire to pursue that project based on the conditions that have been come up with. So again, I think that that's the big thing that kind of came out of the board meeting was you could have AP everywhere and then have one AE just sit out there. Could that AE be judged, if it's not a farmer, to be able to have that dirt, that level of dirt removed? I think it is different if somebody is getting a permit to the extent of building a house. You're probably not going to have a substantial level of dirt removed if you're cutting into the side of a hill. So there is incidentals to building permits, because building permit does state in there that there is levels of grading at times. And our county has a grading permit, but our grading permit doesn't have a lot of regulations to it. It's basically a grading permit that requires the applicant to go to the DNR and to bring the paperwork back showing that they're meeting the state requirement. We don't even charge for our grading permit. It's just that we need to know that that level of grading is happening out there. And you may notice in many of our borrow pits, there's usually been a grading permit application stuck in there too. And that's been about compelling them to go to the DNR first to get the MPDES and to get their SWIP plan and everything in order. And usually the threshold through the DNR is the acre threshold. So the DNR sees it as a disturbing more an acre in an area. That's what triggers that level of the grading permit. So maybe that's something the county could look at as far as, again, a wheelbarrow of dirt up to a truck level of dirt. The question is, what is the appropriate level of dirt? Are we looking at a half an acre, an eighth of an acre, a 16th of an acre, 32nd of an acre? Do we look at thresholds, or do we just simply run it through the conditional use permit process so we know what they're doing, what they propose?
So one of the things I'm getting here is that one of the challenges is just defining what a borrow pit truly is. It's very generic.
Well,
Is that
it's a borrow is very wide open, that it could be the most intense where you're removing thousands and thousands of cubic yards of dirt versus just chopping down a hill and you'll have it done next week. So that's kind of the balance there. And I do think, anytime somebody has a level of side dumps coming to an area, the county engineer should know about it, because they do have an impact on the roads. And the conditional use permit originally was designed in 2008 in that regard on the AP, so that we have a process that we know about it. So I think the distinguishing factor in this debate is, and that's what the supervisors basically had in the packet, is we want to see a conditional use on AE the same way you would treat it on the AP. But again, I think they would definitely expect the boards to do their due diligence and find the answer for the properties that are going through that process for sure. And so that's kind of the balance. Again, I think you all are probably going to have forgive me for doing a hypothetical because I could be wrong, but I do think that if we have a set of community where there's 2 to 4 acre lots that are nicely platted, and it's a cul-de-sac or some sort, and somebody down toward the end has a big hill that they want to chop down, I think that there's a different level of activity or discretion that would go involved. Somebody brings an application into you, and let's say they have all the neighbors show up and all 16 of them in the subdivision we love this idea. It won't last very long. I think you all and the Board of Adjustment have learned heavily through the years on what the neighbors have to say and ultimately what those concerns are. Or if you have 15 adamant people that are strongly against and they feel that the soil content or the topography, it's going to cause runoff or significant problems in the long run, or it could cause flooding because of different levels of, I think that all those hypotheticals can play a big role. And that's why scrutinizing it through normal order and normal process would give the boards grounds for why to deny a conditional use permit. And I've seen them denied. In the last year, we've seen some permits denied for not meeting the criteria. So it is possible.
Any other comments or questions?
I guess I would say that allowing it as a conditional use in ag estates would probably be a better avenue than trying to come up with a middle ground determination of borrow pit. It would be easier to, in the future, address it on a case-by-case basis through the boards like Dan had explained.
So are we comfortable with the one public hearing to move forward on this, or do we need more than one to be objective? Anybody
I'm good with one.
good with one? Okay, Corey?
I'm good with one, but if it went to a second, that's fine. We don't really have a lot of input right now from the community on this, so.
If we move forward with our recommendation to the board, they're still gonna have
We'll have another
Three.
public hearing.
another
We have
public
to see
hearing
the-
to address.
The board, the nice thing about the board is it's the global, I like to call it the county global level, where they do have the more of the news media attention and everything. And it's a lot easier at times to get the word out that they're going through that three public hearing cycle. Attendance, with the exception of solar last year, it was kind of the reverse, where a lot of the heavy lifting happened here at the commission level. But the supervisors have that three public hearing opportunity. And anytime you do an ordinance change, staff recommends it. And I know typically, be careful speaking for the county attorney, but they like us to see the three public hearing step too, because the supervisors can ultimately waive different levels of public hearings. But I think they would be a good practice to have all three to hopefully maximize, and hopefully when our news media are recording with the cameras, that they would report on this. And in the past, when I've been interviewed, I've even told the reporter once, you really got to come to the commission meetings, because that's where you can definitely learn a lot and get the homework and the scrutiny there. But I do think that the way that county legislation works and everything, I know that in this case, they're looking to you for a recommendation one way or the other, but they want to see it. They want to see it regardless of what the recommendation is, and they want to have that debate based on how that agenda item was written and voted on.
I guess giving that, I'd be comfortable with just moving forward on one public hearing and making a recommendation to the supervisors.
Do you need a motion for that?
We would need you to, did you close the public hearing?
No. Gonna make a motion, close the public hearing? Thank you.
Sure.
Debates.
I'll move on closing. the
Okay, we've got a motion. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we've closed the public hearing.
I think in this case, it can be as simple as what that agenda item kind of said, is switching the prohibited to the C in the column. And so I would probably, if that's the route the commissioners are thinking of going, if you would recommend the C go in the column for the agricultural estates, I think that staff can work with the chair on a general statement or a letter that we can bring back like we have in the past. It says that the commission had held the public hearing. They looked at this and they see that maybe the C is a flexible in terms of having a conversation as far as whether an area fits or not. And I do think that the letter should reflect the idea that this doesn't mean yes, it means the area will be scrutinized. So I think we owe it to the county and to the public to always keep in mind that C really does mean maybe.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I would probably suggest some type of motion that would recommend the C and the AE and ask the chair to have a letter to the supervisors.
Okay, at this time, all right.
I'd make the motion to include the borrow pits for earth and materials as a conditional use in Ag Estate zoning district. Under the conditional use, it's scrutinized at that level.
Yeah.
Going forward.
I'll second it.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. What do you need?
Okay. What was the vote?
Unanimous. I think.
Unanimous. Okay, 4-0. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Sorry.
I was just trying to read it.
Corey gets kind of quiet down there. We can't hear him very well. Okay, we have another item on the agenda. Oh. Okay,
that one and then come back to the nuclear one.
I'm
Up to
okay
you.
with it. Yeah,
It's up to you.
I'm okay with it. We talked about this earlier about possibly moving it if, yeah, everybody else is okay
It would just need a motion and second to,
to change the order.
Yeah.
Okay, you need a motion.
I'd make a motion that we change the order to address the issue with the softball fields first.
Okay. I
I'll
need a
second that.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that was unanimous too.
okay.
Okay, we're gonna move on to review of conditional use permit action item for field of competitive athletic baseball field for Morningside University parcel 884714300005. Dan, do you want to read this information into the application or into the record, please?
Yes, first thing that I do want to mention is this is a review session. It is not a public hearing, which means it's on the commission to look and see if the application is complete. You're welcome to collect input from the public, but the official public hearing for this is conducted before the Board of Adjustment next Monday at 5:00 PM. So that's the formal meeting, but this is definitely essential to how our conditional use permit process works. So with that said, this review, Jason Reynoldson, who's the applicant, is in attendance tonight on behalf of Morningside University, who owns this parcel number 884714300005, has submitted a conditional use permit application to construct and operate a baseball stadium. It's in the ordinance as field for competitive athletic on this said parcel. The facility will provide a dedicated space for organized sports, supporting health and wellness and community spirit and opportunities for youth and adult leagues. The project's design will minimize environmental impact, incorporating features such as permeable surfaces, native landscaping, and noise and light control strategies. The development will also attract visitors, promote local businesses, and provide a gathering space for events, fostering economic growth and social interaction. The property is in the agricultural preservation zoning district, where this is an eligible conditional use for review by the zoning commission and potential approval or decline by the Woodbury County Board of Adjustment. I would like to ask as far as the staff information, everything, I would like to ask that I have a staff analysis that was not accurate as far as the packet, and I'd like to ask that this portion be received into the record. And I can definitely explain that in further detail, but basically it's the review of the criteria, where the applicant kind of lays out their response, and then there's a little general kind of analysis. And generally, Staff's position is that it can definitely be compatible with the comprehensive plan in terms of different community goals and land use goals. And it technically can be compatible with fitting within the property and potentially the zoning. But as far as going through this process, it's always the position of staff that we've got to hear what the public has to say and what the neighborhood in general feels about it. But on paper and everything, it looks good in terms of fitting. It looks good on paper, but we definitely have to hear the narrative that comes out of the public hearing process with that regard. So otherwise, the criteria and everything overall looks in pretty good shape.
So we need a motion to approve.
I'd ask for this to be received into the record.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve this?
I'll make a motion to accept the information,
Updated
updated information from the staff.
A motion, need a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, you got it. So, do we have anyone here that wants to speak to this application? Alongside College? I'll let you come up first.
Name's Jason Arnoldson. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Facilities and Operations at Morningside University, representing them. And ready to take any questions that you might have.
And specifically, anybody else?
So lighting for evening games, 60 game schedule, 30 of them home, something like that. How many nights would there be, like double headers or?
I did bring along my baseball coach with us to make sure we had the schedule down right.
Just trying to get a feel for how much use. Would there be evening practice?
How many double headers are you thinking about?
Adam Booby, head baseball coach at Morningside University. To answer your question, like, I don't think there would be a substantial amount of evening or light usage. I think there would be times when that would come into effect during the season, but the amount of times we're typically wrapping up practice when the sun's going down and out of there before then. So we play a lot of afternoon games. I think the 60, I think that's probably on the high side compared to how many we actually would play at home.
The other issue that was brought up was the traffic, increased traffic flow and bus parking, whatever. What's the idea to address those issues or minimize the impact on the surrounding area?
Traffic would be directed down Buchanan or 190th. I think that's, and then Old Home, County Home Road. Sorry. Yeah. So it wouldn't be affecting anything on 141. The goal is to move everything through the slower speed sides of the property. Bus parking, southeast corner of the property, which is, that's where the planned locker rooms and that's where the players are going to be ended up being.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have anyone else from the public that wants to speak to this application? Or preliminary report?
I'm Chad Holford. I live at 1631 County Home Road. So the lights would be in my bedroom. But don't really have a problem with the ball game if there's some issues on time restrictions, I was traveling out late, went to bed about 9 the other night, and at the Woodbury County Sheriff's deal, they started shooting at 10. I'm like, geez, Louise, and it's cut off at 10. I mean, they do a good job. So I don't have a problem with that, but I'd like to know if there's going to be, like on your night games, like time restrictions out there, because if you have double headers or whatnot, I mean, that's right. That's in my house. And that's, that's okay. Another issue would be water. Are you guys going to have turf? Are you going to have grass? I mean, turf. So, water, if they, be like an irrigation well going in, if they're using extremely large amount of water, would that affect the neighbors' wells in that area? So, and Jim lives down the road from me, but you know, we had some of that when a person bought an acreage out there, there was an open well and their septic system was running within 50 feet of that open well. And if it wouldn't have been Jim bringing it to somebody's attention, you know, we would have had an issue there. So there's just minimal things there. I mean, I'm not opposed to, I have a roping arena there and I have lights, but my neighbor lives next to me and he's never called me and said, hey, can you shut off your lights? I mean, I get it, but that would be the only thing is on that, as far as maybe some time restrictions like the county has to abide by for the shooting range. I just don't want to be up at 1 o'clock in the morning when I'm going to run my business the next day. And I think you guys are doing a good job, but that's just my input for being a neighbor.
Thank you.
Most of those college games, they don't start at 7, do they? They start. Yeah, like address the time, yeah.
Information on our schedule. We're playing primarily in March and April. So we're always searching for warm weather. So, you know, we're going to dominantly play in the afternoon. I think we only had one game this season that a doubleheader that started at 5, and then we had a little bit of a delay with waiting out lightning, and then the second one got started late. So I think there was only one game on the road, and that was in Orange City this season that we would have had lights on post 10 o'clock. So yeah, most of the time we're not going to use lights because we're always trying to play during the warmest part of the day. As we get deeper into April, you may have a 4 o'clock start on a doubleheader, or 5 o'clock typically is our latest start of a doubleheader, where those lights are, you know, you're probably at a 5 to 6 hour window to get a doubleheader in, where those lights may be on till 9, 10 o'clock. But it's very few amount of days that would possibly happen.
Then the only other, I guess, that I think about going forward is know that, but you know, when they bought that ground, I actually bid on that ground at that auction. I was runner-up bid, but you know, we were told that it was going to be used for their ag program from Morningside College, and now all of a sudden, you know, and I think you guys need to be aware of this. Now it's being used for a baseball field. Well, then they own the additional acres down across to the north. Okay, well, what's going to go on there? You know, it's like you're being told one thing and then other things happen. So that's kind of a, you know, I moved out there for the purpose to being out in the county, and we've, you know, gone through that. So I would like that to be on the record. And I know I wanted to hit this meeting first because I'll be at the other ones as well. But, you know, I have, you know, I'm right. I mean, I like to be a good neighbor too, but that was just some of the, you know, are we dealing with another deal? And then that's across the road from Debbie, and, you know, it's just, I think it needs to be taken into consideration.
I guess, and one thing I'd like to address on that too is that's where it's important that you guys are at the Board of Adjustment meeting, because that's where those stipulations are worked out, that maybe it makes it work better for you by conditions they may place on it. And like you said, there's very few night games. I don't know if it's one a year, if that's going to bother you. Maybe you will not want any conditions to control that.
Colleges, those games are in the early afternoon. I've been to Briar Cliff games, I've been to one. So I'm not completely opposed, but.
And that's like Dan explained, that the C means that doesn't mean it's accepted. It means it's conditional, so that there are things at this point of this meeting coming up with the Board of Adjustment it's important to be at, and you want to work together and make it the best you can. And that's what that purpose is.
And if it's okay, if I just kind of respond to, as far as irrigation goes, it's a turf field. Irrigation will be minimal right at the front of the entrance of the facility itself, most likely. The rest of the land will still be used, farmland for our ag department. In regards to the 56 acres that are north of Old 141 there, it is something I brought up with our cabinet at the university, and it is dedicated to our ag department. The purpose was to, you know, grow our ag department. When we purchased that property, the section that we're looking at is small enough, and we were in a need for a field. So that's kind of why it turned to that side. But the other, I think it's 56 or 54.5 acres specifically is for our ag department. It's our highest retention, second highest retention major at our university, and it's growing large. So I know what he's saying, because I asked the question too. Hold on, we bought this for a reason, and really the need for the field came up, and the smaller section fits. As far as the lighting goes, and I don't know if the layout was published, but the layout of the field is the lights will mainly be facing south and west. So if you're on County Home Road, you'd be east of Old 141. You might get some light from the south facing, but that would be the farthest set of lights that you'd have. And again, I brought Adam with us so that we can make sure we have the schedule correct, because I don't do the schedules for baseball, but that was really just so I can respond. So
Thank you.
And the other thing that was mentioned regarding the septic system, anything that's done there is going to be, or has to be approved through the Siouxland District Health. And
Yeah, and they may even, they'll take reins of dealing with that aspect, but it may involve some other level of state as well.
right,
But,
and so that address, or that issue will be addressed at that level, not at the conditional use permit level. So just to answer that question before it's asked.
I've made a lot of comments about game times and number of events. As a former coach, you know that if you make a nice college facility, there's going to be some high school teams want to come play there. And now your season is not just March, April, it might be all the way through August. So the power of a conditional use permit at that meeting, they can set all kinds of parameters to please everybody. So you should speak your mind on some of those things that, you don't.
My name's Debbie DeForest. I live at 1861 Buchanan Avenue. It says here that they're going to do some noise and light control strategies. I'd like to know what those are. And it says also a gathering space for events. What events? Other events? We're going to have concerts. We're going to have, other events, or are we strictly just going to play baseball?
One of the things, my name's Jim McCullough, and I live down the road at 1639 County Home Road. And I just want to make you aware that that's a very busy road at that time of day when they're proposing the games. And I'm asking, are the Woodbury County prepared to provide the traffic that's going to be there at that time? We have several bedroom communities that live down to 141, and at certain times of day, and one of them is when businesses quit and shut down, to have some large employers here in town, and it's pretty busy. And so that, what provisions are they going to make for that traffic? I think nobody's really thought about the amount of traffic there. And I second Deb's motion about what other activities they're gonna have. I think there needs to be some commitments made of what is gonna happen, but we all know once the toe's in the door, we all know what that happened.
Thank you.
As far as the other events, it's baseball. That's what the events are. So we have a 70-acre campus. We do all of our events on our campus. There's one outlier where we did an event at the airport when we started our aviation department, but it is baseball. We're not, we've got a full campus that we do all of our events on, and I don't know if Adam would have like a award ceremony or something there.
Yeah.
We typically, we don't do that, no. Even at our stadium on campus, we don't have any kind of liquor or beer licenses. So no, that's my plan at least. It makes it a lot easier for everybody on our side.
One other thing, we do
Who
have a
wants those
facility
conditions brought up at the Board of Adjustment?
here in the city that
To come, but we can.
The county. taxpayers support. Explorer Stadium, I don't know why we're not using that.
We gotta have you come up to the microphone because we're not,
Oh,
we're
we
recording,
have- I'm sorry.
we're recording,
I'm
so.
pretty loud, so I didn't figure anybody needed my speaker. I'm saying we have a stadium in the city. Why we're not using the Explorer Stadium? Cause I go by there a lot of times, there's nobody there. It's supported by taxpayer dollar.
I can partially answer that. Morningside has been, Lewis and Clark Park has been our home field for a decade, I think. The contract was renewed with the owners of the Explorers, and we were not involved with that. So we are actually looking for a home. We've tried to negotiate. It hasn't really amounted to anything. So honestly, that's why looking at the layout of the field, so we've got that little piece, that little corner there, and I say little, it's 13.5 acres, but it would fit. And that's kind of how we got here. We've done a lot of work trying to get back home to Lewis and Clark Park, but we haven't been successful at this point. So I have to admit, I'm not in those negotiations and talks, but I'm privy to some of the information that happened. So I'm not uncomfortable sharing that part.
Thank you. What are we ready for? A recommendation? Close. Well, it's not
It's
the
not
hearing,
closed.
so we don't have to close it. So yeah, we just need a recommendation then,
Mm-hmm.
if we're ready to move forward. You need to make a recommendation. If we want to move it to the Board of Adjustments, if you're ready to do that. If you feel that the application is sufficient and accurate.
Yeah, I'll make a recommendation that we move this forward to the Board of Adjustments based on the criteria of the application.
I will second.
I guess I'd be comfortable then to second that motion with those conditions being addressed in the letter that's acknowledged, that's passed along to the Board of Adjustment that were brought up at tonight's meetings or tonight's meeting.
And I will say we're on a shorter time frame because they do meet Monday and we had the Memorial Day kind of situation. So Chris and I'll work together to get the frame.
Monday's Board of Adjustment meeting is at,
Monday,
yeah, what time is that?
5 o'clock
5 o'clock. So.
in this very
So do we need to go? We have more items on the agenda. I think we're going to jump back to the nuclear waste storage public hearing for the consideration of nuclear energy facilities and nuclear waste storage to be included as part of the Woodbury County zoning ordinance. Dan, do you want to read that information into the record as well, please?
Yes, this is a continuation of our last several months' work. This public hearing is for the consideration of nuclear facilities and nuclear waste storage to be included as part of the Woodbury County zoning ordinance. The Woodbury County Zoning Commission is looking at the inclusion of the terms nuclear energy facilities, nuclear waste storage, and our related uses as land use options in the ordinance in preparation for potential recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. The hearing is meant to address these various concepts, not limited to nuclear energy generation, modular nuclear energy systems, other technologies. The role is to consider whether designating these terms as either allowed or conditional uses in specific zoning districts. That was written very broad, but the recommendation is the general industrial zoning districts. Additionally, if we look at any kind of ordinance amendments and layouts, it's always imperative to mention the housekeeping when you change ordinance language. Sometimes you have to shift the sections and the page numbers and things like that would ultimately come out. But that's kind of cosmetic as far as what the ordinance is reflected. But I just want to generally summarize, since last time we met, it's been a couple months, and Assistant County Attorney Widman had mentioned his criteria in terms of the review as far as the legal aspects of the ordinance. And you might recall, we talked about the flexibility of electrical energy generation and looking at the chemical aspect of being able to interpret that. And we got into, I'll have to let his memos that are included in the packet kind of speak for themselves. But if we get to, he had a couple concerns about kind of the intent behind when you have the establishment of an ordinance. If we go back into the time frame of 2008, technically nuclear existed at the time. So that kind of reflects the aspect of if we're going to look at some type of level of regulating it here at the county, it's probably better that we actually enumerate in the land use summary table what a nuclear energy facility and or storage is. Because if you're going to hold a public hearing and start considering nuclear in any capacity, we already do have an issue as far as notification distance. And so kind of the front of the ordinance relates to, we could get it technically, if we took that position of nuclear or electrical energy generation, somebody files a use on it, we would have a 500-foot notification area underneath the current layout of the ordinance. That means right now we could still get an application in, and then we would have to kind of consider and weigh whether, you know, nuclear fits that. And if we have kind of a different interpretation, if somebody says, oh, that doesn't fit electrical energy generation, and then you can kind of set yourself up generally for, or we could for, you know, challenges kind of across the board. So I think what his memo has reflected is you're on more solid ground if you have have terms in there that show that there's a conditional use permit process, that show, for example, that there's a 10-mile notification zone. And there's some things that if I can find what I'm looking for here, I just want to kind of point out about nuclear in general. So I did use the time to interact with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the kind of working through some channels, talked to, actually I kind of got to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on two paths. I asked the DNR for help, and I asked the Senate office for help. The Colby DeWitt over at the Senate office kind of led us to a path of finding this Brian Burgon, who's an acting liaison officer. So he kind of interacts with the Senate office and kind of governmental relations. And so he kind of prepares this kind of background on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and gives us some points there. And he basically said the NRC is a regulator of civilian use of nuclear materials, and it's not an advocacy organization. It's fully a regulatory organization. And the mission of the NRC, similar to our mission, is to protect public health and safety and advance the nation's common defense and security by enabling safe and secure use of civilian nuclear energy technology. So they would regulate the civilian style facility. The NRC looks at reactors, material, and waste as far as their regulation. And much of the regulations that the property owner deals with can be found in the Federal Code of Regulations, Title number 10, which is quite robust as far as parameters that they have to go through. And so prospective applicants for nuclear reactor licensing should go to the NRC with their specific plan, their reactor technology. They have, through all their levels of paperwork, they have licensing classes which trigger regulatory approaches. They have to bring a business model and a project timeline. So right away, I've learned that it's sort of like a super level of conditional use where they have to prove over and over their level of safety parameters and requirements to the NRC. So I don't really like to use the word piggyback, but it is kind of an opportunity where we can look to the federal that they enforce and run them through the application requirements there. But by the time they come to the conditional use to go through our criteria here, we're going to ask for that material that they run through that so that we can see how well it meshes with the criteria that we have here, because we have a duty to protect the public health and safety of the people here locally. And if the federal are doing that, it sounds like we've got kind of the two avenues to regulate on that. So how can we best I don't want to use the word efficient, but how can we use that to the advantage so that we can take that federal jargon and help communicate with our own landowners here locally and stakeholders. And if we're doing a 10-mile and we have an expectation of a 10-mile notification zone, and if we have posted in our industrial area, we got to be very clear that if that 10-mile even reaches outside of jurisdiction, that people do get notified on that. So they're going the federal route, they're going the local route. So Mr. Burgon's statement, which is in the packet, did mention the NRC assigns project managers to guide the prospective applicants through the regulatory process. And then the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy, he had mentioned in a statement, promotes the domestic use of nuclear energy and supports advanced reactor developers through programs. They call it GAIN, Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. And I think he just referenced that to include, demonstrate to the county that there are avenues of support through federal programs to try to initiate. He also mentions that they regulate waste storage, including low-level and high-level waste, and has different regulations for their spent fuel pools, dry cask storage, independent spent fuel storage installations, etc. Now, I find that important too, so that we have something to look to as far as what the federal expectations are. I can't emphasize that enough because I think it's pretty safe to say we're not all nuclear scientists or nuclear experts, so we're going to have to rely on that level of federal guarantees and ideas that they can get through that level of threshold to the point that hopefully there's a multiple conversation approach where there's an application. It would be my expectation that I could pick up the phone and find who their project developer is and ask them further questions so that I can, do the due diligence on behalf of the county as far as staff and of course, any, what the commissioners might have questions on too. So we need to definitely have a relationship of communication with the NRC. He'd mentioned the DOE is developing integrated waste management system for storage, transportation, and disposal of spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste. He also referenced the NRC has that agreement state program where if there's an agreement state which allows states to assume some regulatory authority over certain levels of nuclear materials, byproduct materials. And I think we saw some of that reflected with our healthcare industry and some of the things that the DNR could lightly touch. But it sounds to me like it's still quite significant as far as state and federal hands on this. The more and more I read into it, I think that we're going to have to expect a lot from them to show us that they're federally compliant in a lot of the respects as we run them through that. So I think we're going to be definitely, if we go this route, a communication mechanism to relay that word to the public and to glean as much information as possible. Now, just for informational purposes, I think we got started out on this a little bit ahead of time as far as the federal government kind of reacting. I know last year in about the month of May, you may have seen it in the backup materials, the Biden administration kind of put some limited emphasis on nuclear as part of their energy package, but it wasn't quite up to a high, I would say, level of media attention, but it was definitely in some of the White House paperwork that went out. But I don't know if you saw in the news the other day, the President of the United States signed 4 executive orders that were related to nuclear that are meant to reform the process and make it a bit more efficient at the NRC level. And I'm going to read a few bullet points that I kind of gleaned from the news. Basically, the president signed executive order to reform the NRC to reduce dependence on foreign technologies, to decrease regulatory barriers, and to support the domestic nuclear industry. It's indicated that the NRC has 18 months to comprehensively, based on these executive orders, they've been charged to revise. So it's not changing the regulations. It's telling the federal bureaucracy to revise its regulations and guidance documents, focusing on balancing safety concerns with economic and national security benefits. Some of the revisions include establishing some fixed deadlines within the federal bureaucracy for license evaluation and approval, adopting science-based radiation limits, revising regulations governing compliance with NEPA, or the National Environmental Policy Act, a federal piece of legislation. It establishes an expedited pathway for approving safety-tested reactor designs, and they've been tasked to create a process for high-volume licensing of micro-reactors and modular reactors. It also includes the NRC to reform its culture and organization to rapidly promote nuclear while ensuring reactor safety. They're tasked to consider the benefits of nuclear power to economic and national security when licensing and regulating civilian nuclear power. The goal is to establish the United States as a global leader in nuclear energy, creating tens of thousands of jobs, and it goes on to the economic aspects of it. Another interesting fact is the executive orders tasking the federal bureaucracy to increase the deployment of new reactor technologies and expand nuclear energy capacity from 100 gigawatts to 400 gigawatts by 2050. And it goes on to say that this is part of the president's energy independence, deregulation, and reduction of barriers to building infrastructure. And so it just kind of goes on to talk about this being other parts of the nationwide energy apparatus and infrastructure. And the only reason I kind of bring that up is we see that now there's movement, at least at the federal level and the NRC. And in talking with this Brian as well, of course, he had mentioned keep examining the website in addition to what he had to say. But the reason they say that is because their website is, it looks like quite a bit if you've been up there and kind of perused through a lot of the material. And if you just pretend to be a developer and say, hi, I want to put a nuclear reactor in, you're going to see that there are lots of steps in there. And so now we're kind of at a balance. An executive order at the federal level most of the time doesn't make a huge change. It's attempt to change how the bureaucrats operate on a given policy. So this basically is saying that the bureaucracy has to come back with a plan to make this much more efficient. And sometimes those plans, depending on what the restrictions and the regulations are, might actually take an act of Congress as well. So I guess the point of the story is that because we're looking at nuclear, we've got to keep our eyes very clearly on what the feds are doing as well. But at the same time, the county ordinance is designed kind of the same way we discussed borrow pits tonight, to be, in a way, have some type of infrastructure that can sort of intake a project that might be heavy on federal regulations, but maybe not so light at the local level where it's a bit tougher at the local level for us to be the nuclear scientists, but yet kind of find a happy medium there. And I think our conditional uses kind of do that to an extent of, like when we've talked about the borrow pits or things that are more complicated that do require DNR and other forms of regulation. I think it's up to us to do our due diligence when we get a conditional use to ask those questions. Are you meeting these federal guidelines? Are you meeting these respective state guidelines? And something as significant as nuclear, I think that it's a huge investment. It's not somebody just gets an idea and 2 months later they're going to put a nuclear reactor on their farm. It don't work that way. It's a multi-year process. And by the time that they start engaging with the county, they're going to need some level of showing us what their pathway forward is. And I think that if anything, we've got to be very clear what our expectations are. And that is, we need to know the full scope of everything that you're doing within our authority. I think the clear thing that the federal does with us a lot is anything in the name of national security. I'm sure that there's a security apparatus and there's certain things that we have to be very careful about when a project is brought to us as far as site plans and specific layouts. But we need to be very careful and know specifically that they're going to meet those guidelines and what we can and need to know in order to handle and help our neighbors and our constituents and the people here locally. So they've definitely got a multi-band process. So with that said, this whole process, I know the supervisors have been very patient with the commission on this issue to flush it out and to get it right as far as what the expectations are. We got to kind of look at what the appropriate areas are. I know we've talked about general industrial potentially as a conditional use to kind of keep it in that respective area. This has been a different debate. We haven't filled the room on it. We've all witnessed since last September. Every single one of these meetings, we've had some, but we haven't had the level of like wind or solar, but we've definitely noticed it and got it, out there. So I'm not sure entirely what that's saying, but I will say that because we have electrical energy generation in the ordinance for general industrial, I think that's really reflective that at least back in 2008, the community as a whole does consider electrical energy generation an industrial use. I don't think that there's any threat of this going on ag preservation land or being sold or shopped out to be on farm ground. I think that all along the scope has been for an industrial based activity down in that respective area. And when we've mentioned that, we've been trying to collect enough comments to talk about it as a community and kind of leave the zoning district a bit fluid, hoping we'd get more public input. Because obviously we know when agricultural preservation's involved, a lot of times that draws up energy. But at the same time, we've have mentioned that industrial would be the likely place as far as this respective activity. Now, based on what Joshua Widman had mentioned from the county attorney's memo, just kind of bouncing back to that, ultimately what you come up with, it'd probably be a good idea to enumerate the term and define the term. So if we stick a nuclear energy generation in the table, or we look at nuclear storage in the table, we have a couple line items in there, and we put the C in there, then we prohibit it in every other respective zoning district. I think that makes it more clear that there's a process in place that kind of has the flexibility of the conditional use, but allows the county to collect the information and see how we can coexist as far as conditions or cares and concerns that could be maybe part of a respective conditional use permit process, knowing that that applicant has went those steps at the federal level, one way or the other. And so we're not sure enough yet. To me, they've got to go a long way at the federal level to demonstrate that they're suitable for that area. I think if they kind of come in and do it a bit linear or concurrently in some respects, they would have to clearly prove that those federal steps can ultimately be met. And I think federal is ultimately the final say. We're not going to be able to approve a nuclear reactor at the local level and they can't get federal approval. It don't work that way. It has to be the feds are in charge on this one ultimately, but the conditional use gives the Woodbury County landowner and the area stakeholders a voice through a local process that we can learn more about that. And so those are things that we would definitely have to monitor through that. So I would suggest, depending on where we're at, kind of at this juncture, some of the language has been put in the packet as far as that respective conditional use and extending the notification area out to the 10 mile and everything from that nature. It would kind of be my suggestion to look at that as a potential criteria. If that's something that the commission would like to do, we could draw up some language and officially have Joshua scrutinize that. I think that the way Joshua approached that memo, he wanted to make it very clear that if you are to go the recommendation route that recommends a conditional use, that you do consider having it directly enumerated in for the practical purposes of stability of the use. In other words, the stability of the permitting process. So.
Commissioners, any comments or questions at this point?
So I have a question regarding the NRC. Did he indicate in your communications, like currently, what the timeline is, you know, from a, say, a start to finish of just the whole process of going through the federal applications?
It wasn't, quite honestly, it wasn't as clear as I would like. I feel like it's very situational, and he had kind of mentioned some of the fluidity. And I know with just the other day with what the Trump administration did, I do think it puts a question mark, at least on what the federal process is. I think it's pretty reasonable to expect that the federal will retain a significant process. They're not going to turn the keys over real fast and say, okay, we're done with the NRC and have at it, locals. I think that there's going to be infrastructure there. I think the administration as a whole is trying to push nuclear as part of the energy package because of all of the increase in electricity nationwide that is happening. And we've seen all these different forms of energy, some of them more controversial than others. And I think some data I saw the other day, I think we're at what, 19% or lower as nuclear as part of the nationwide. And then we rely very significantly on the fossil fuels and the other forms. And so I think one data, I think Secretary Burgum kind of made a comment about tripling eventually nationwide the nuclear level of output. And I know he had referenced small modular nuclear as part of that. So I think the administration still has, and they put them on the clock, I believe, of 18 months. So there's an expectation that the federal bureaucracy cleans that up in 18 months. But there's also the political will. Does Washington have the level of political capital at this point to pass certain measures in Congress within the time frame? We just started a new administration, but the Washington clock runs out very quickly in terms of the threshold to get legislation in before the members of the House of Representatives start thinking about reelection in 2 years. And so we have to look at, consider at least the political side of it, as well as the practical side and the functional side of it, for sure.
I just have a comment. I think what's really driving this now, especially in the new administration, is the fact that it's being driven by technology, AI, and these data farms are just humongous, sponges for energy, and we don't currently have the energy production that would require all this to happen.
Yeah.
I also heard something interesting just the other day in a podcast about these two modular reactors could run the entire city of Las Vegas. I mean, it's pretty amazing the technology, how it's changing right now in the whole regards to nuclear energy production.
Yeah, and I think that the public and us as constituents of the federal government, I think that it's an expectation that we carefully examine if they're modernizing these things, that are they able to be efficient and at the same time protect the public health, safety, and welfare? And are these systems proven? And I think a lot of that'll have to go through a level of scrutiny at the federal level. I think down here at the local level, we've got to be equipped to ask the question as far as conditional use process. Are you going through a robust federal process? And I'm not questioning the federal process. I'm questioning that the applicant goes through a process that is complementary. We're one of the many jurisdictions nationwide, but I think every single county and every single city also has an expectation that the feds are going to get it right, as far as us being associated with them in that respective guideline. And so I do think the way our zoning ordinance is written, we do have the apparatus to sustain a conditional use permit process regardless of what they come up with. We just have to be aware of what that process is and if it's suitable and it fits and it can run through our criteria.
Do we have anyone in the public that wants to speak to nuclear? I can't forget you. This is what this is for, right?
So right now, if I came in I could put in the contract right now, but just, it would come up to interpretation in the current. So, right, so really, this is about clarifying.
What's already existing. Yeah.
So personally, say, if you're going to clarify, I think the 10-mile notification range is significant better than that.
Thank
I would consider going bigger, actually. Not that I want to look at any potential problems long term, but nothing is happening forever. So I would be concerned about any potential unfortunate incidences or even the storage of the materials seeping in the ground and back. To my mind, we fall outside of 10 miles. And you're saying the projects would be limited to industrial? Right?
Yes.
Knowing that things change and priorities change, I would hope that land that is in a different zoning category would not then go through a process to be made industrial just to have a project approved. Are there any safeguards for that?
If I may address that. Yes, there are, in the principles of zoning, one of the things that's kind of written into our code too, spot zoning is looked down upon. In other words, you have a farm field, it's entirely AP and 40, if you go to grab a 40-acre tract and you say, hi, I want this to be industrial, we will immediately look at that at the abutting area. And we'll also look at our future land use map. Those are the two tools that we put together. So the priority of Woodbury County is we got a comprehensive plan 2040. It has an underlying map. And this underlying map shows the ag areas, it shows the industrial area. And if so somebody in an address, let's say out by Danbury or Anthon comes in and we want to put an industrial parcel there, well, staff right away, I'll tell you, we'll immediately look at the map and say, oh, that's ag. And we'll immediately tell the applicant, it's probably not going to work for you. You're welcome to initiate the application, but you're going to likely run into that brick wall because of the fact that it doesn't match the map and the parcels there also don't fit with the area. In fact, in our training through some of the Iowa State training, they put that question up quite a bit. Is this a spot zone and does it fit? And a spot zone can be significantly challenged as far as, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if I may, we kind of work at the will of the board in a lot of respects. And so the Board of Supervisors last summer, I believe it was Supervisor Radig at the time, was on the agenda item. They explained that, and this was kind of following when the Biden administration put the initial statement out there and some of their language. I can't get in the heads entirely of how the supervisors intended for this, but they directed us to look at it because nuclear is kind of a thing nationwide. So they expected the zoning commission to conduct these public hearings. And I want to thank you for being here tonight because we've had several meetings and we want the public here and we've encouraged the public to come because it helps us make better determinations on having a dialogue directly with the public. And so we've attempted since last fall, I think maybe September, we've periodically had some meetings and we kind of backed off for harvest a little bit. Then you run into December, then we start having them again here in spring and kind of the same opportunity to have the public hearings. But the supervisors are being mindful of the world industry as far as electricity, electrical generation. We know generally that folks have been around the county asking about the wind in the past and the solar in the past. And I even think on the agenda item, Supervisor Radig had mentioned that we've already talked about wind, we've talked about solar, we may as well talk about nuclear. And so he kind of put that out there. And that's really the essence of exploring it, because even though we're a little bit ahead of it from other jurisdictions, we are kind of the opinion generally that other jurisdictions are going to have to start talking about this in some respects. I got a call from, they got the Dwayne Arnold over there, the one nuclear plant in Iowa, and it was deactivated. Now they're looking at reactivating it over there. And they had an older ordinance where it was technically kind of like a legal non-conforming situation that expired. Now their community has to look at nuclear again because their apparatus there wasn't up to par as far as the how do you zone that from the local level or from the local perspective. So I think that communities in one way or another are all going to gradually react to what's going on in the marketplace. And a lot of times developers or other folks approach the counties and start talking. Is it able to happen there? Then sometimes that triggers the reason why a community is having the conversation. I'm not aware of any specific developers. I haven't had anybody like, hi, I want to put a nuclear plant in. So I think that the supervisors are trying to look at it from being a bit proactive on okay, get behind the 8 ball, maybe have the commissioners engage this, look at it so that maybe that time comes, we have some type of apparatus that we can have the dialogue with the public. And that is of the essence. Conditional use is what triggers the public into the decision-making process of helping us all learn. I think it's easy for all of us to say that it's hard to do this without the input, the expertise, just what we learned earlier about the baseball field and the time constraints and all those things are important because we may not be thinking about it and somebody from the public brings it up, then it ends up becoming a part of policy. So very essential. Yeah. That would be an excellent part of the application process. And in previous meetings too, we've included our emergency management directors as well, because there will be a component for them to get in tune with the actual plant and what the expectations are of the county. So this is actually to the point of when a conditional use comes up, the county would have to look at it even on a larger scale of the safety apparatus and the partnership with the agency partners and everything.
I guess, what's the emergency service director? What's his name
Michael
again?
Montino.
That's right.
He addressed a little bit of that too. And the other part that he brings in or brought in was, what's the reward if we take on this risk? So that's part of all of what's going to come into play. And the two major things that I guess I would address, maybe some of your comments, was the by changing this to separate it out from electrical generation, it eliminates the interpretation issue. And it also allows for that expansion of the notification, which I think is extremely important, that you need to have. And the 10 mile, like you said, maybe that's not enough. I think at 10 miles, if it's on the news that there's a nuclear plant coming in, people are going to show up. I mean, I think that's going to happen. And then the other issue with the general industrial, putting it anywhere, it could expand, it could be added, but it's going to be in that future land use map area. It's not going to go in the middle of a cornfield, 10 miles from, it's just not going to happen, at least in my lifetime on this board. I can't see where that would be an opportunity.
I would like to add one thing. We try to make resources available, and on the county website, under the Planning and Zoning Department, it's Economic Development, but parentheses Planning and Zoning. You go to departments here. We have these different buttons, and one of the areas that we have up here is the future land use map. So if the public goes out here, this is the most recently updated map, and that's the layout of Woodbury County, and you'll see the purple areas would be the areas of industrial on the future land use map. That's not the zoning map, that's the future map. So if there's any parcels down in this area that are actually agriculture now, and they want to expand them, it's likely that it could be expanded. I think one of the easiest talking points that I went through during the comp plan process was it's always easy for us to say the industrial area is tucked between the I-29 corridor and the Missouri River. And I've explained that a lot to landowners across the county, but I do think that kind of resonates with that when they years ago did the 2005 plan, it became very apparent reading through the materials that your average Woodbury County resident felt that, yeah, we do have an industrial area. It's over there. And so we kind of got the idea that that's kind of the location. And there's a bit of an expectation that there's not industrial near me, east side of the county. And so we do have some parcels, in different spots kind of spread out of a few bit under the old red book and under the old mapping, and the zoning started in the early 1970s, around 71 or in there. And then we kind of had variants of the red book up until 08 technically. And so that old map was much tougher to look at, but it had some industrial parcels because historically there may have been a business or something that's legal non-conforming that's stuck out there. And so that was kind of an industrial district. If somebody has an abutting industrial district that's still out there, that could technically still be a compelling argument to rezone something that's next door because it kind of fits with the area. That's one area where a person could maybe argue the map a little bit because of if somebody like with the rezone, it was here earlier tonight, they have an existing parcel and they asked to expand it a little bit. That's kind of that argument there, but they were kind of okay within their map there. So not the best example, but there's always an argument that can be posed. So.
And part of, I guess, going back, the land use map back in 03 or 04, when I first got involved with this, I kind of looked at it like, well, that's not necessarily what's going to happen, but it's kind of an indicator, the likelihood. And if there is something that's put out at not spot zoning, but in the middle of AP, you could see where maybe some AE would come in, but it's not going to have that drastic change unless it has a similar use next to it that can be argued to make that change.
Thank you.
Oh, hey Al, could you push the button on there? I didn't catch it.
Down?
Yeah.
Oh. This is a topic I never thought that I would be discussing. I am not a nuclear expert or an expert in nuclear storage. You said that you depended on the federal government to oversee all this. Federal government has made mistakes too. We've looked at things that have happened in our country with water storage and whatnot. And then you look at this comment that was made, question was asked about, would using spent fuel reduce the amount of storage time of nuclear material? And then his response was, it reduces the storage time from 10,000 plus years to 300 years. There's no way that we can know that. We can't know these things. You're from Danbury. I think when you look at the map of Woodbury County, Danbury to Cushing is probably the biggest expanse without a town in between. When you look at Woodbury County, there's a lot of communities about every 6 miles, not in every township, but pretty close. So if we get to the 10-mile range here, We're talking about a community that's going to be affected. We get into if we're looking at the industrial area for some type of nuclear production, how does a flooding event affect this? We've had two major ones here. What would happen? To me, it sounds like the discussion is whether Woodbury County wants to provide a vehicle to have nuclear energy in Woodbury County. I don't even know why we want to go in that direction. There's vast amounts of empty land in this country. You can see that when you fly, such as what did they try? Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, and they were reluctant to have nuclear energy, but I guess I'm not interested in having it in my backyard. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's it for the public participation.
Okay, well, I think, of course, you can close the public hearing and kind of decide what the next steps could be. And I think kind of the next steps could be if you want to look at the C situation in the ordinance, or have some type of draft that we could run through Joshua on, and then report it back, and of course, hold another hearing. I think with this magnitude, it doesn't hurt to continue the level of public hearings. But if we get to the point of having the draft, which we do have some language that I think we could work through the chair and vice chair potentially on to, so we can kind of get ourselves to have a draft that can be scrutinized by Joshua to eventually be debated. And I think if you look in the packet there, the apparatus following the memo is basically putting the C in, extending the notification distance, and kind of, again, piggy-banking on the conditional use. So I think ultimately that would be your draft. But the reason Joshua is so important is because of the definitions and making sure that we have the appropriate coverage. One of the things I asked the NRC was, do you have a legal definition? And they the reaction was quite strange. Of course, they mentioned the code of section 10, but there's not necessarily such clean-cut definitions on what nuclear energy facility is, because there's so many different level of class of nuclear. So if somebody's bringing you, for example, a small modular or a certain style, we want to make sure that it corresponds appropriately with what we construe as a nuclear energy facility. So that's where we need the guidance out of the legal department.
I guess one question I have is, by not defining it separately, Joshua's concerns are going forward with something, it can be or challenged in the courts. If you deny it because you argue it's not part of electrical generation, that could also be then fought in the courts that it is.
I think
I mean, we're kind of on both ends of the fence. If we don't define it, they could legally argue that it is electrical generation and it has to be included in that.
Yeah,
versus on the other end.
I think
If we do nothing, we're still leaving ourselves open for.
Yeah, it's sort of like any issue has the multiple sides, the variables, the components that can come back. And I think that if you have, something tightly defined, it helps with the expectations that you're going to have of them. As far as you can't link the land use summary table too well, parsing it together with that distance. The way that it's written in there, we extend the distance out for telecommunication towers to 1 mile. And I think there's maybe another thing like landfill or something in there. But you go to the land use summary table, they're in there. But we don't have it in a way that it's broad, where you go back and, because I asked Joshua the question, and when I asked him, I suspected it's not right as far as, you do have 1 mile in there, But can we administer it, can we administratively, if we're doing it by interpretation, electrical energy generation, can I look at it as administrator and say, that's very significant. I need to have a larger certified abstractor listing because I want to notify more people. If we don't have it enumerated in there, we don't have any grounds to compel them to notify more than the 500 feet. And so kind of linking and tacking those two on together. And I think nobody said it better than Joshua, the way he wrote that in his two memos. So I would have to defer to basically how he said it. But if this is the route that the commission plans to take eventually, I would suggest, because we don't have the language here, we do have a form of it in the staff report there. And that language could be directly dropped into an ordinance, and that could be technically the draft ordinance, and you could, directly recommend that to the supervisors. But I offered language directly to Joshua already that is written out in that form and had him look at it, and he still stands behind that memo as far as having that stuff defined. So I think we're all kind of looking for the direction as far as where the commission might go with it. As far as if the commission's interested in looking at it generally in the conditional use, I think we put some language together and then we debate it at a future public meeting. It doesn't mean that that's the language you're going to go with, because you can change it on the floor. You can make the changes. We hear more from the public. Hopefully we'll try it again and have more people involved. Please tell your neighbors so that we have more folks involved. And that's something I think we've made it clear, I think can't speak for the supervisors, but I've told them, the commissioners do look at the intensity of the room. That's been a big part of the solar debate. I remember when we reported back on solar, they very well knew what was going on here with our work sessions and the heavy activity and the due diligence that you all put in to that. I think in some respects, we've tried to duplicate that with nuclear. It's just that we've missed the public component quite a bit. And we actually heard quite a bit here tonight, of course, from the representatives that did approach the podium tonight. So hopefully we can hear some more.
Do you think any of that has to do with the fact, like we had that expert talk about, it's a 10-year deal to get nuclear put in, where solar, you get that in, right away in less than a year. And so the public isn't they don't see the urgency. They hear nuclear and they might panic about it, but it's such a long process.
I think physically, we know what a wind turbine does. We see it. We drive by them in other counties. We know what those solar fields look like, because I've talked to so many people that have told me, hey, guess what I saw over the weekend, Dan? I saw a solar field. People know that I'm in the zoning and they like to tell me those things. But with that said, we physically know it and can experience that. And I think the challenge this time around is we're looking at kind of a hypothetical in a sense. We know that there's X amount of different styles of nuclear. There's different categories, the old classic systems and the small modular nuclear, and they have those. And there's kind of a little bit of a tough idea of the conception of what it is and what it does. I think if we were to do a general poll, folks might think about, I think radiation comes to mind, or Chernobyl, or Fukushima, or, you hear about events. Yeah, you hear about events, and that becomes part of the form of what nuclear might be. But the concrete example of, I think, Corey, you're onto something about, well, that's a big federal thing. It may not get here in X amount of years. And so I think here at the county level, being proactive on at least having a permitting mechanism is tough when you don't have the beta project or even experiencing what the other community went through. I think the closest thing is probably the Idaho or the Georgia one, where they at least have some level, but then you might have a jurisdiction that don't have much of a county ordinance. And, you know, they rely on the federal there. And the problem that we have is, and I've said it all along, look what happens to us with telecommunication towers. We have the conditional use permit process, but we're pretty much compelled to, we get one, we're told we can't ask about signal quality, frequency effects, and everything that's in the Iowa Code 8C, to the point that the county can only ask about setbacks and positioning and fall zones, and to the point that they cleared everything through the FCC. They cleared everything through the state. And if you look real carefully at Iowa Code 8C, and I usually put it in the top of the packet, it says you can't ask this, and this, and you're barred from asking that. And a few years ago, in the Board of Adjustment, there was one out somewhere, and one of the representatives for the company, one of the members was asking a little bit where it was kind of going close to the something about the safety of it to an extent. And the representative said, that's not within the purview. And they highlighted directly what you're not allowed to ask by the state there. So we can get preempted pretty easily as far as what the federal and the states do to us, especially with Iowa Code 8C. So if anybody ever wants to pull that out, just Google Iowa Code 8C and read through those parameters, and you'll see how much the hands are tied of your local jurisdictions. When I first got here, I called the city of Sioux City and kind of asked one of the individuals over there, so how do you all permit those then if you're not allowed to do this? And they said, you got to print Iowa Code 8C and put it right in the packet and tell your commissioners and Board of Adjustment members to comply with that. And I'm thinking, wow. And so, yeah, and that's where we got to be generally careful, is where we have an apparatus for permitting, which is generally the, well, it's the zoning ordinance, but with these different federal executive orders and federal regulation, we always got to watch how the federal is behaving, as far as, do they preempt us enough that it don't involve zoning anymore, to some extent. So exercising the zoning ordinance is technically adding something to your land use summary table and expecting an applicant to abide by what those regulations are and have it coincide. And our ordinance was designed in that way to be open-ended enough that we can kind of coexist with the federal and still ask within the criteria. I think that's the method to why we have that apparatus in place. And veering way too far away from it can be problematic at times. So I guess, again, I would kind of ask the commissioners, is that something you want to do another month and run it through Joshua?
I think we need to do another month. We're starting to see more participation here, so that could be a good sign too.
That is.
I mean, this is probably the best participation we've had since we've begun.
Yes.
A few letters here and there, and it's like, yeah, this isn't enough to make major decisions on. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Everyone in agreement?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
Okay, so, yeah, if you want to do some type of motion I would suggest that.
Okay.
That we'll carry on next month and have some sort of draft language.
I guess I'll make a motion then to move this for one more month, and we'll get back with John.
Okay, we have a motion. I need a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. And there you have it.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're getting there. Next item on the agenda, accessory second dwelling, Senate File 592. Dan, do you want to read that information into the record?
Yes. Wow. I will say that I was really surprised to see the legislature get get involved in the accessory second dwelling legislation. I'm going to have to generally let this speak for itself, but I think there's some aspects to discuss. So 129 in your packet. Basically, Governor Reynolds signed this legislation on May 1st, amending Iowa Code Section 331-301 to regulate accessory dwellings in counties across the state. This also affects the cities. I only focused on the counties because it was redundant, but the cities are in the same boat. This legislation mandates significant changes to county zoning, permitting practices for these accessory dwellings defined as additional residential dwelling units, either attached or detached on the same lot as a single-family residence. Up until this legislation was passed, you would have to do a conditional use permit for either a relative or worker, or you were ag exempt where it was a central point to help and support the farm. Now, I want a second dwelling, come to the county and get a building permit and meet the setbacks. And that means it facilitates two houses on one lot. They do have a few things, but they tie our hands as far as much of everything, with the except of meeting the setbacks. I do think that we could probably hold them to the 23 feet likely on the minimum dwelling or the minimum dimension as far as, but that's even not certain because of what a single detached dwelling is. So I'll probably have to have more discussion with Joshua, but I do think that we probably can hold them to the 23 would be my viewpoint on that.
Okay.
They do have, I have to get into the, read the small print there, but they do have kind of like a square footage ratio, like 50% of the main as well as the 1,000 kind of square footage there. So there is a little bit of a balance, but the way I read into it, it's pretty wide open now more than ever. And this actually prevents the county from reacting in a way to restrict it. It basically says you have to do it. And so that means that we're probably going to have to talk about even changing our ordinance. In other words, taking the restrictions out of the ordinance. So that might be something that we might be bringing to you pretty soon here to make adjustments to accommodate, because it's such a drastic change that we can't be stayed construed restricting something that is, we're told by the state that has to be achieved and accomplished. I would say about the only tool that we can use to our advantage as far as there's going to be problems, I think, when it comes to, oh, I've got that house on my property. Now I wish it wasn't on my property. I need to split it. I'm going to call a surveyor and split that off. Now we're going to have issues, well, septic issues. We're going to have lot size issues. And so there's going to be these little byproducts from putting it on there. And with that said, we're going to have to probably recommend placement strategically on certain lots where 2-4 acre lot, probably be a good idea to say, hey, why don't you put it over here? Because there's 400 feet along that roadway, and you might give the surveyor a chance to split 200 feet or whatever our common numbers are off of that. But it's going to definitely be kind of a much more of a building permit conversation versus the typical the conditional use permit process. And we all know we don't get them very often where somebody comes in for the conditional use for the relative or worker. The majority of them have been farm ground where somebody has put one on to support the farm operation. That's where we see the vast amount of them actually pop up out there. So they're basically out there unpermitted. But as far as this situation, it's going to be kind of untraveled waters in a lot of respects.
Interesting.
Does the, I'm assuming there's no information or no I'm assuming there's no conditions that are explained, like say you have a 2 acre lot and the guy says, well, I want to put another house there. And he complies with the 1,000 foot or 50% rule. He could put it 3 feet from his other house because the setbacks, we don't even have a setback of a house to a house.
10 feet. We could regulate them to 10
Well,
feet.
you can regulate that?
I think,
Or
under,
does this
assess-
say, no, you can't?
I think under, well,
It's not an accessory structure.
that's
though.
a good question. I do think that, we can have at least latitude on our setbacks.
Okay,
Uh,
because that's what I guess I'm looking at here, if you put the house and if you do split the lot, it's impossible to even meet the setbacks if
Yeah.
you split it.
It can be attached.
I've-
Split it anyway.
I will tell you that I've had people approach the office a few times, at least one time I can think of, that they said, I'd like to put the second house on the lot. And I said, well, you should probably contact a surveyor and you might have to do a minor subdivision. I don't want to do a minor subdivision. A lot of people usually don't like to do them too often. They try to avoid them. But then they say, well, I've got a relative, my grandma or my mother. And well, we do have a conditional use permit for that. And I saw the lot and I said, well, if you're going to do that, you might want to strategically locate that on the property. And I go, you'll bring it to the commission, you'll bring it to the Board of Adjustment. And I always, because I never brought you one yet, since I've been here. I think there was one right before I got here. But to me, you would have to have a good site plan. And I think that's even a reasonable question to talk about at the board level when somebody did a relative or worker conditional use permit, where I think probably the board members would catch it and say, hey, why don't you position this in a better way? And how are you going to handle that well and septic situation later on? Are you going to have an easement agreement, both for maintenance, replacement, access to the property? So all of those things would play a role. And yeah, my concerns would be ultimately, what would the title look like? What would the real estate market look like as far as finding that buyer that actually they love the house, but they really don't want that lot with the second house on? I imagine that would impact the industry there to an extent. So,
Especially in the county.
Yeah.
Who wants a neighbor? Normally, I mean,
but
that's what we deal with now
Mhm.
is we try to talk people out of building that other house for a relative because odds are somebody's going to be there that isn't a relative anymore.
Mhm.
I mean,
yeah, it's the value of the house being there, not wanting to pay the extra taxes or the maintenance or the dealing with it. And then on top of not being able to rent it out, that's the other thing too. No restriction on who lives there. So technically it's looking like I'm gonna build a house and go ahead and
rent it out.
have some supplemental income.
We have a housing shortage, don't you know?
Did you see this coming? Did you hear about this legislation?
I
I'm surprised.
generally I try to watch the legislation and the Iowa COZO, which is zoning officials and everything. And I caught wind of it maybe a month or so. And then we kind of sit there, are they going to pass it? Are they going to pass it? Then they pass it, the governor signs it, and it's like, wow. In the old days, stuff like this would go to the legislature and it'd look like pie in the sky, or it wouldn't pass. It'd be one state senator has this idea and it just doesn't fly. And so we've seen a lot of strange legislation out there through the years. It's just getting over the hump and like, wow, that passed.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, that was a shocker.
so that's really all I have to say, but stay tuned, I
Okay,
guess.
stay tuned. All right. Well, unless anybody else has any questions or comments on that one, we'll move on to the variance legislation, which is,
Yeah. So now
we've been busy.
the other information item is that the variance at the Board of Adjustment level has been changed. Before, it was much more on an economic hardship where the use of the land, I cannot use my property in this way to either put this structure or locate this structure, and it's hitting me in the pocketbook real hard. I mean, that's the elevator way to say it, I think, with a variance. And we had the phrase practical difficulty or economic hardship. They're both kind of in there. Then the Board of Adjustment would evaluate it based on the circumstances that they describe. One of my model variance examples that the Board of Adjustment, I think, did a really good job on this one property was somebody had this perfectly 2-acre lot, and it had kind of a creek go through it a little bit. And the creek was not a floodplain at all. It was one of those like high ground creek way down below, very rare chance of flooding scenario. There's always a chance, so we can never say that. There's always the percentage chance. But the way that this creek did is it pushed, you know, on the AP, how you have the 100-foot setback? The 100-foot setback, I asked the applicant, they own the way it kind of meandered through there, there was no reasonable place to put the house on at all. And so I asked the person interested in building the house, I said, give me a site plan and put the house in the creek. In other words, show me your site plan with your desired house in the creek. And that meets the county requirement, building the house on the creek. And then give me your alternative site plan on how you can best use the property. In other words, get the value out of the property, position it on the lot. And they showed me a different site plan. And then I run it by Mark Nara, at the time, the county engineer. Mark, do you have a problem if they were to do a reduced setback in terms of the road situation? Will there ever be any right of way taken away from this area? So he kind of looked at the county plan and didn't see a major problem. But he did kind of come in with his set of stipulations like Mark did, would say, I would not want it X amount of feet from here, or Mark kind of came up with the Mark zone as far as where he would be comfortable with it. And so they came in and they requested a setback instead of 100. I think they asked for 60 or 45 or something that looked really kind of reasonable in terms of the layout of the lot. Now that one to me kind of showed both practical difficulty and the hardship in some respects, because I got this land and we all know at the pocketbook level, it's kind of tough sometimes to get a lot of choices, sell the property or whatever, find something else to meet your plan or desire. So that variance, I think, went very well as far as all the stakeholders commenting and going through that process. But the state legislature found out that economic hardship just makes everything harder. And there's reasons why you should not approve variances. And the threshold to get a variance is just really just, wow, you can't get to that. And so they kind of reduced it down to this idea of looking at such things as minimum lot size, setbacks, yard width, height, bulk, sidewalks, fencing. They went into these like real like setbacks and measurement things, not use variances. By the way, use variances are barred if you look really carefully at the ordinance, because that's actually a rezone. We learned that in the Iowa State training, like a use. You can't come in and I want a variance to put the nuclear facility out by Anthem. No, it won't fly. But the way the ordinance is written. But this allows somebody to come in and say, I've got a practical difficulty and I want to build it closer here. And if it's okay with the county engineer and okay with X amount of people, it allows to basically make the ordinance a little bit more flexible. So.
Be interesting too.
Yeah, so just want you to be aware of that, because that's what your counterparts of the Board of Adjustment are going to have to kind of get used to. So that's all I've got, unless you've got some questions on it, but I have to let the legislation kind of speak for itself.
Questions or comments on that one? All right, number 6, public comment on matters not on the agenda. We're limited as far as our public comments out there. Okay, I'm gonna guess Alan doesn't want to talk anymore. Number 7, staff update.
The only update is kind of a repeat, just a minimal repeat. I'm gonna have to evaluate and work with the supervisors on what we need to change in the ordinance in reaction to the state. If we go to that level.
Thank you, Alan.
We'll go back through the the public hearing, the normal order here on the typical recommendation and everything. So that'll probably get bounced around quite a bit. So I'll do some talking with Joshua and how we might need to react to some of this stuff.
Okay.
I guess one question, if you could ask him or when you're talking to him, if you just put that to comply with state law,
Mhm.
that's always the easiest
Yeah.
way
So-
to change.
Mhm.
So we don't have to go through a bunch of language change.
Public hearing.
And it might be just, it might even be just striking something, because I
Okay.
know that we have that, it's around the 4.11 and that 4.06 in there somewhere where it says it's prohibited to have the second dwelling. So the recommendation might be we strike that line.
Okay.
So I think it can be housekeeping for the most part.
Okay. Good. Anything else?
That would be it.
Okay, commissioners, comments or inquiries? Number 8. Corey, wake up. Number 9, adjournment. Corey.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
I got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Okay, we're adjourned.
Okay, I'm stopping it right now at 3 hours and 6 minutes.
Are you kidding me?